Hello and welcome to another episode of Dax's Deviants. Today we are doing something a little bit different. I have went through my entire backlog of recordings and I have got a few recordings lined up. But the recording that was meant to happen this week unfortunately was cancelled. So in the interim I thought we would do something a little different, and this is Dax Talks. So this is just me talking today. I do not have a guest, I just have some research and some chill beats so that we can just chill together and talk about this week's episode of Kinks and Hookups. So we're going to be talking about the sexual expression and enjoyment of kinks as a sexual experience. Now, everyone will have their own experiences when it comes to hookups, or maybe you don't. It's entirely how you decide to express your sexuality, explore your sexuality. For me, hookups were something I started having when I was about 17 or 18. And when I think back on some of the hookups that I've had, I always remember the funniest one that I had, where I was just starting to explore some of my kinks and kind of discover more about myself, really. And one of the ones that always pops to mind is when I was doing some outdoor hookups. And I'm not sure if some of you guys feel the same, but I certainly feel that outdoor hookups, they have that little bit of risk to them, so they just have that, bit of excitement. So for me, this was I would say it was an initial kinky hookup. Looking back on it, it was fairly vanilla. But nonetheless, it was a good hookup until the top inhaled a fly and he choked so hard that he came, and we both just had this moment of, what the fuck just happened? It was very funny. We still talk. We're still on good terms. We do joke about it quite a lot. It was an experience. It was cut a little short. We did go again at a later date, and there was no flies this time, thankfully. But I would love to hear some of your guys' hookup stories. So if you feel like it, you can leave a comment on the podcast and let me know about your funniest hookup. So, getting into it, let's start by talking a little bit about kinks. So, when we talk about kinks, there is the broader terms of kinks, and then we have the more niche ones. So, when we talk about broader ones, we're talking like BDSM, we're talking outdoor, we're talking bareback, kinks that are fairly varied and more common in individuals. And then we go to the more niche ones, which are maybe a little bit riskier. They might have a little bit of learning involved. They might even just be not everyone's cup of tea and things like that. We talk about water sports, we talk about breath play, we talk about mummification, that sort of thing, where it is a little bit more on the niche side because they're not as popular or as common as things such as BDSM and outdoor or public play. So looking at it, we do have a lot of kinks that are more what would be classed as mainstream, and we do have kinks that are classed as more sort of niche or taboo because they are, they could be classed as gross. Water sports is one of these ones where there is definitely a very big divide in the community regarding it. From my own personal experience, water sports is something I really enjoy. But a lot of people, it is a hard limit, so it's not something they want to try or something they want to do, and that's understandable. For myself, scat is a hard limit. It's not something I would enjoy, but if you're into it, kudos to you. It's just not my cup of tea. everyone has their own kinks, and that is what makes everyone unique. When we look at the hookup culture has actually changed quite a lot over the years. When we look back to even not so long ago as the 1990s, where the internet wasn't really a big thing, hookups were done much, much more differently. People were required to go to known cruising spots, which have maybe been places that were shared by word of mouth. We had gay saunas, which we still have them today, but back then they were kind of safe havens. But mainly the way you would communicate kinks for having hookups would be the hanky code. This is something that I have talked about on the podcast previously, where a lot of pup colours are still associated with the hanky code, even rubber colours, leather colours, things like that. We still associate these with the hanky code, which is a set of colours with a corresponding kink. Now, the hanky code would have been worn in a pocket, or you would have your hanky tied around your wrist or your ankle, tucked into your shoe, and it would let people know that we're in the gay community, what you were into, and what position you would take in it. There's an extensive list. I will put a picture on the blog for this episode. You can check that out at daxesdeviants.com, and it shows kind of the different sides of each kink, where someone might wear a yellow hanky. If they wear it, and I might get this wrong because I don't have the image in front of me, if they have the yellow hanky in their left pocket, it could signify that they are a piss top. If they wear it in the right pocket, though, it could mean that they are a piss bomb. And this was kind of a way of telling people, hey, this is what I'm into. And, you know, if you got approached, you could have your hookup. Today, it's a little bit different. We are very much blessed with the internet and dating apps such as Grindr, Recon, Jacked, etc. No brand sponsors here. I'm just shouting out the ones that I had on the top of my head. We still have our male-only spas, which, you know, we still call them gay saunas. And we have cruising spots, which again are a lot easier to find thanks to the internet. Places like Squirt have advertising areas where you can advertise cruising spots, which, you know, you can detail a glory hole, a park. There's loads of different kinds out there. This has changed hookup culture as a whole to something that is more of a commodity, I feel. Hookups are a lot easier to come by nowadays. They're not as taboo. You don't have to be as sneaky. You can literally just check to see who's close, send them a message, invite them over, or go over to theirs, or meet somewhere in public and have your hookup. It's also a lot easier to communicate your kinks. You don't have to have a physical show on your person to communicate what you're into. You can literally just send a message, or with a lot of these apps, you have saved messages, so you can just tap a button and send it straight over. You can also share images to show what you're into. The things that we didn't really have as close as 30 years ago. So it's changed drastically. And when we talk about the intersection of kink and hookups, casual encounters are a lot more common nowadays, I feel. It's due to the wonderful thing that is the internet and the acceptance of not only gay culture, but also kink culture as well. Things are a lot more open and expressive and free, and people are able to have these discussions more openly and talk about self-exploration with a partner. Being able to have these discussions with a partner is key. As someone that enjoys kink play and likes to involve kink aspects in hookups, I definitely think being able to have these discussions before meeting someone makes life a whole lot easier, because you can really set the boundaries before you're even there. Each person can say, I'm into this, I'm not into this. You can have a quick discussion. They then come over, you have your hookup, you have your fun. It's great. Before, you would kind of have to wait and meet the person and then talk through it. And that's a lot of, maybe you are someone that likes to have a lot of discussion before a hookup. I've had hookups where it's a little bit social and then it's a hookup, and I've had hookups that are just straight to the point. Everyone's different, everyone has their own way of doing things. But certainly there is times where you just have that little urge where you just want a hookup, and having to do all this chatting to find out what's good, what's bad, what you want to do, what you don't want to do, it can be time consuming, and it can really ruin the energy that has been built up, the tension that you are waiting to release. So being able to have these new mechanisms does make things a whole lot easier. When we look at the psychology and social dynamics, this can actually be broken down into 5 key sections. So when we look at the psychological aspects of kink and hookups, it's important to understand kinks. Kinks can develop for a variety of reasons. They're often tied to an individual's experiences, personality, or life events. Psychologists believe that some kinks may form as a way of managing anxiety, expressing repressed desires, or exploring power dynamics. This is actually something that has been talked about with Dr. Spro, who will be joining us again next week, where we will be discussing the aspects of exploring kinks for your body and your health. But we have talked about how exploring your kinks for your sexuality and understanding your kinks can have this sense of wellness for your psychology. And understanding where your kinks came from is also a really important aspect, because understanding yourself fully can actually lead to much better, not even just sexual hookups, but kink meets in general. We can also talk about power dynamics. Many kinks, such as BDSM, involve a clear exchange of power, which can be psychologically fulfilling for those involved. For some, relinquishing control is a way of escaping stress or responsibility. For others, taking control can be empowering and validating. Now, when we talk about this can be for a multitude of reasons. Someone who is maybe unsatisfied with their work life might want to be dominant in the bedroom as a way of establishing this power and validating their feelings of being in control. But they might be locked away in a job where they are constantly just suppressed by management and things like that. So having these kind of personal power exchanges can be a way for a release. And definitely within hookup culture, this is really important. Being able to express yourself and release emotions in a safe environment through hookups, be it casual or with a long-term partner, can really help you psychologically. They can give you the satisfaction that you're maybe not getting in your professional life. It's all about that balance between professional and personal, I feel. It's something that not a lot of people consider when talking about kinks and hookups. Because people see kink and hookups as, oh, it's just sex. But is it just sex, or is it something more? Some people see hookups as a way of healing the soul. It's a way of expressing yourself and not just a sexual release. And I definitely feel like hookups are definitely more beneficial than some people think. It's also important to talk about how they are safe spaces for exploration. Kinks often provide a structured and consensual way for people to explore fantasies that might otherwise be taboo. The controlled environment of kink play allows individuals to safely express parts of themselves that might be suppressed in their daily lives. As we've just talked about, maybe in your professional life, you are just an employee. You're not, the company, big companies and that, they just think you're just a number. By having the control over your personal life, your sexual side, it might be a way for you to kind of release and feel free and feel in control of one aspect that you do have control over. At the end of the day, you are fully in control of your body and what you do with it. So having that dynamic is so important. When we look at the psychology of hookup culture, casual sex and emotional detachment is the first one that kind of pops up for me. In hookup culture, the emphasis is often on physical gratification without emotional commitment. For some, this can be liberating, offering freedom from the expectations and obligations of traditional relationships. For others, it can lead to feelings of emptiness or dissatisfaction if emotional needs are not being met. So when we consider this, I definitely feel like I fell into the second category when I first started having hookups. When I first started having hookups, it was definitely, I got a release, I felt satisfied, but then I would leave and I would feel like something was missing, like there was an emotional element that wasn't being met. And it took me a little while to realize that I kind of just missed the physical touch of things. The physical side was really important to me, and that's kind of when I discovered that aftercare was quite important. So having hookup, that would be great, and then just chilling for a little bit and having a little bit of a social, a little bit of a cuddle, that was what I needed. But it took me a long time to kind of realize that the emotional side was not being met, and that I needed to kind of work on that for a little bit. It took a while, but now a hookup is just a hookup to me. It doesn't really need any emotional support from it anymore. It is just a form of release. But again, that is just me. There is others that certainly don't feel the same way as I do. I would love to know what you guys think about the subject, because for me, it did take quite a while to kind of come to terms with hookups are just hookups, and there doesn't need to be an emotional aspect involved. If I wanted kink and emotion to be combined together, it would need to be a longer term partner, or it would need to be someone that I was comfortable with, had similar interests with, and they were more of a regular partner rather than just a casual or one-off partner. Hookups can sometimes be used as a way to boost self-esteem or seek validation from others. The thrill of being desired by someone can be addictive. It may also lead to a cycle of self-worth being tied to sexual conquests. Now, this is something that I found quite interesting when I was doing my reading, is that I do feel like there is a certain aspect of hookup culture where it is validation based. We certainly see this online a lot with certain porn accounts, especially on social medias, where they will post about things for validation and try and get comments to say that, oh, you look great, the likes and everything. And they rely so heavily on this, and they try and constantly get it. And we've seen it before where someone stops getting as much attention and they start to falter. It's a bit of a slippery slope, and there's a lot of psychology behind this, as we've discussed with Dr. Sprout. It is interesting to see though, and it's definitely more common than some people realise, is how heavily the validation is tied to hookups and how people want to do a good job and be seen as really good or really kinky in regards to having hookups. This goes as far as content creators online, so it's not just a localized thing. It is very much a big problem that we are seeing within hookup culture. This also ties into attachment styles. So everybody has a different kind of attachment style. You've got secure, you've got anxious, you've got avoidant. There's quite a few. Everyone approaches the hookups differently. For example, someone with an avoidant attachment might prefer casual encounters because they feel safer keeping their emotions at a distance. Someone with an anxious attachment might struggle with a lack of emotional connection. And again, this ties back to the validation. Someone who's anxious might be seeking this validation, whereas someone who is avoidant, they're not really looking for it, they're just looking to get the job done. When we move over to the social dynamics and stigma, looking at the social perception of kinks, there is this stigma and secrecy. Despite increased openness around sexual diversity, many people still feel the need to keep their kinks secret due to fear of judgment or social rejection. Kinks that deviate from societal norms are often misunderstood, leading to stigma or even discrimination. Now, we've talked about this before with Dr. Spro and with a couple of the guests, that kinks are still very much discriminated against, and not even just out with the kink scene, within the kink scene as well. I've seen it happen firsthand, and it is not great because it does really put a dampener on people and makes them feel invalidated for being interested in what they're interested in, which is not good for their psyche, and it's not good for their gratification either. These are people that they're just trying to express themselves, they're trying to enjoy what they enjoy, and they are being judged for what they're into. And it does tend to have this bigger issue where it can cause psychological issues at that moment and further down the line, because they then might try and avoid what they're into because it's seen as, gross or, not normal. And this can lead them to then have less gratifying hookups, which is not what we want. We want everyone to be happy when they have a hookup. Hookups are meant to be fun, they're meant to be a release, they're meant to be enjoyable. There has been a shift in recent years, however, with more public conversations around kinks thanks to media, online communities, and sex-positive movements. This has helped normalise kinks to some extent, although the challenges still remain. And again, this is even within the kink communities. There is these challenges to overcome. Individuals might experience feelings of shame or guilt related to their kinks, especially if they internalise negative social attitudes. Therapy and support from accepting communities can play a crucial role in helping individuals reconcile these feelings. I know of plenty of fantastic members within the kink community, both local, international, and global, that these are the pillars of the kink community. These are the people that, if someone is being judged within the community or out with the community, these are the people that I would go to first and speak to them, because they know exactly what to say and how to help. Very good example is Handler David. He was international handler, 2019, running for a few years. I do plan on interviewing him. Sorry for the surprise shout out, David. But he is just a fantastic human being and is always willing to lend a hand to anyone that needs it. And even this year, he was a great help at helping a close friend of mine get into a better headspace after being judged for the kinks that they were into. And it had a nasty toll on them. They were very upset about it because they were at a place where kinks are all meant to be accepted and they were judged for it. And David just has this magical way of making everything better. He is just an absolute gem, pillar of the community sort of guy, and we need more people like him to make kink less of, it's this or this and that's it, to everything's welcome, everything's acceptable, and whatever you're into, you go for it. When we look at the hookup culture in society, there is evolving sexual norms. Hookup culture reflects broader changes in societal attitudes towards sex. As traditional dating and relationship models have evolved, casual sex has become more accepted, especially among younger generations. This shift is often tied to changing gender roles, greater sexual freedom, and the influence of dating apps. We also have gender dynamics. Hookup cultures can be experienced differently by men and women due to societal expectations and gender norms. For instance, women might face more stigma or slut shaming for participating in casual sex, while men might be encouraged or praised. These dynamics can impact how individuals navigate hookups and their subsequent feelings. I definitely feel in today's age we still have a lot of these differences, but sex work is being more and more recognised as work, which I think is fantastic. Sex workers are very hard workers. A lot of work goes into these things, and a lot of them get slut shamed for it. Like, oh, that's disgusting, that's what you do for a job. Like, absolutely not. These guys work really hard, they are skilled at what they do. Personally, it's not something I could do. For one, I have performance anxiety, so not going to happen. And number two, it takes me far too long. And I don't think anyone would want to see a half twink, half horror have sex for 3 or 4 hours or however long it would take. It's not enjoyable. So kudos to these guys. These guys are incredible, and I think they should be praised more. They do more work than some politicians, put it that way. We also have the impact of technology. Dating apps and social media have revolutionized how people connect for casual sex, making it easier to find partners, but also sometimes commodifying human connections. The instant gratification offered by these platforms can change how people view intimacy and relationships. I definitely feel this statement is true. Having a hookup is so easy in today's times, well, depending on where you are, because dating apps are only so good as the location you're in. And they do make these connections with people so easy that it is easy to kind of forget about deeper connections. Some people use them for their intended purpose of dating, but most people on these apps are on just for a quick fix. So it does kind of take away these deeper connections that people can form in exchange for an instant gratification. When we look at communication and consent, negotiating boundaries is absolutely key. It is paramount. Effective communication is crucial in both kinks and hookups. Partners must clearly express their boundaries, desires, and limits to ensure a mutually satisfying and safe experience. This might include discussing safe words, preferred activity, and any emotional needs. There's also the importance of consent. Consent is the foundation of healthy sexual encounters, especially when kinks are involved. All parties must be fully informed and enthusiastic about the activities they engage in, and consent should be ongoing and can be withdrawn at any time. Again, we have spoke about this on both seasons of the show. Everything boils down to consent. It is all about consent, consent, consent. It's also important to manage your expectations though. Open discussions about what each person is looking for, whether it's purely physical, something more emotional, or exploration of kink, can prevent misunderstanding and hurt feelings. In hookup culture, where expectations can vary wildly, this communication becomes even more critical. When we then look at the psychological impact of hookups and kink, there's the emotional aftermath, and this is the aftermath of a hookup or kink experience, which can vary. Some people feel satisfied and empowered, whilst others might experience feelings of regret, loneliness, or even a hookup hangover. where they question their actions and choices. I think more commonly referred to as post-nut clarity. This is something that we do see quite often, and it's especially more common in people that are still struggling with their sexual identity or even their kink identity with the kinks that they're into. This kind of post-nut clarity can have a almost immediate psychological effect where they either regret their actions or they feel like they're dirty or they've done something wrong. And I feel like it is more important to understand yourself and what you're into as part of coming to terms with this, so that the post-nut clarity doesn't hit you as hard. You've also got to consider healthy versus unhealthy engagement. It's important to recognise when involvement in hookups or kink becomes unhealthy. For instance, using casual sex as a coping mechanism for deeper emotional issues might lead to more harm than good. Similarly, if engaging in kinks leads to distress or disruptions in one's life, it might be worth exploring these feelings with a therapist. For personal growth and exploration, on the positive side, exploring kinks or engaging in casual sex can lead to greater self-awareness, personal growth, and deeper understanding of one's sexual identity. For many, these experiences are empowering and enhance their overall well-being. Personally, I always enjoy a good hookup. It makes me feel great about myself and kind of allows me to just get on with my professional life, and it does give me that release, because especially if you've had a stressful week at work, it is nice to just have a hookup. Doesn't need to be a quick hookup, to kind of revitalize that energy and get back to a refreshed headspace, I would say. I definitely feel like hookups help me clear my mind. They get all of the horny thoughts out for a little bit, and I can focus on me again. If I've had a stressful week at work where I've got a lot on my mind, having a hookup can actually just help me unwind and focus on me for a little bit, because I don't need to worry about work, because the only thing I'm worried about is my partner, their satisfaction, making sure they're okay, the consent, and making sure I'm respecting the boundaries that they've set. So it takes me out of work headspace and into hookup headspace. And I think that is really important. We then look at the role of therapy and support, and this is point number 5, which is kind of important. So, seeking professional help for those struggling with the psychological aspects of kink or hookups, whether it's shame, guilt, or unhealthy patterns, therapy can be incredibly beneficial. You can get sex-positive therapists that help individuals explore these topics without judgment and provide tools for healthier engagement. There is an aspect of people trying to use sex as a coping mechanism for previous trauma in life, and while it might work for a little bit, it will eventually have detrimental results or diminishing returns. So I think it's really important for people to kind of seek the help that they need. You can either go through your GP, or you can look up sex positive therapists online and see if there's one that maybe works for you. It's also important not to just go with the first therapist that you find. It's always good to look around, have an initial conversation, and see if you, number one, click with the therapist, because there is no point going to a therapist that you do not click with. You want to be able to talk to your therapist and share things that you wouldn't normally talk about. And if it's not a therapist that you can click with, you're not going to be open to talking about these difficult topics. So it's important to find that, number one. And number two, it is really important that they are someone that understands, especially when it comes to sex positivity. As there are some therapists that aren't as sex positive and are not as equipped to talk about kinks and things. And this is not because they're not a good therapist, this is just because it is not their area of expertise. For instance, Dr. Sprout, who we have talked to before, he's an expert. He is one of the world leading experts, and it is very clear from the way he talks that he knows what he's talking about. He has specialized in this though. Other therapists and psychologists maybe have not, so it is best to look around and check for key points 1 and key points 2 to see what will work for you. But on the off chance that you don't want to go to therapy, there is community and support groups, and these are also really important. You've got online and in-person communities, and these can offer support and reduce feelings of isolation while being part of a community, because these share similar interests or experiences and can normalize one's desires and provide a safe space for these discussions. As I mentioned previously, you have people like Handler David, pillar of the community, but you do have the community as a whole, and everyone in the community has their own way of dealing with things, but it is also important not to info dump on people. Some people are not equipped to deal with the info dumping, so it is important to speak to the community and say, hey, having an issue, would like to discuss with someone, and then be pointed in the right direction of someone who can help and have these discussions with you. So moving on to section 3, we're talking about the practical considerations here. Now we need to talk about disclosing kinks. This is important for personal gratification to ensure your partner or partners understand your desires, interests, and what you're looking for. Research shows disclosing to a casual partner can be easier than disclosing to a long-term partner or someone you're in a relationship with, for a few reasons. The first reason is a casual partner or hookup partner isn't going to be someone heavily involved in other aspects of your life. If they're not interested in your kinks, you can find another casual partner to practice your kinks with. With a more serious partner, this could lead to dissatisfaction with sex and could lead to seeking gratification from other sources. This can become problematic if the relationship is closed. The second reason is judgment. If a casual partner judges you, there's a nice little block button on hookup apps. You can just tap that. You don't need to worry about them judging you. However, in a serious relationship, this judgment can have a real psychological impact, as we've discussed previously, which can lead to relationship breakdown. Something most people would want to try and avoid. The third reason is separation of sex and romance. Some people wish to keep their sexual and kink side different from their romantic side, which means sex with a long-term partner is just sex, and casual hookups are their way of exploring and practicing kink. Consent and safety, as we've previously spoke about, are of vital importance when engaging in kink and hookups. With certain kinks, there are more dangers to consider than others. When we talk about these more dangerous kinks, we talk about bareback, we talk about needle play, we talk about breath play, and we talk about CBT, or cock and ball torture. These are just some of the examples of some of the more dangerous kinks which need a discussion before engaging. This is because you can get bodily injury, you can get STIs, and potentially death, which is a big scary thing. But you need to consider it with these kinks. Maybe not so much bareback with death, but definitely other ones. They are a real risk. You need to put in safety precautions to ensure everyone involved is safe, first and foremost. I've got a few examples here. So the first one I've got is a safe word or a signal. Regardless of the kink activity, a safe word should be established. Stop is an effective safe word. However, if you are partaking in something such as consensual non-consent, stop isn't really going to work because of things established. So you want to pick something that is more obscure and something you wouldn't usually say in a sexual activity. For instance, one of my friends uses the word bird, since, the bird is the word. And this is just something that he has been using for a while, and it makes things so much clearer because the minute he says bird, everything stops. That's his safe word. Although, if you're tied up or you're maybe you've got a gag on, then there's no way for you to actually speak. A tap of a hand can also work as a good signal. For myself, I use a triple tap, so if I am gagged or can't breathe for whatever reason, I just triple tap, and that's my way of saying, need to stop. Something's not quite right. The next thing on the list is PrEP, PEP, and regular testing. These are especially important for bareback or any activities involving blood or bodily fluid exchange. It's also paramount to know your status before having a hookup for the safety of everyone involved. We are getting to a point with hookup culture where STIs are in some places more managed, and in other places they are becoming drug resistant. And this is very dangerous. If you end up taking an STI that is drug resistant, this can actually cause a lot of problems for your health. Myself personally, I get tested every 3 months, and I get a constant supply of PrEP. So I'm always well stocked up in PrEP. There is 2 methods of doing PrEP. You can take it daily, or you can do it event-based. I always do it event-based just because of some of the other medications I'm on. It can wreak havoc on my kidneys, and I don't need that. One thing that was considered when I initially started having problems with my knees is they took a fluid sample from my knees and tested it to see if it was gonorrhea. And I thought that was really confusing. I was like, why would you be checking my knees for gonorrhea? And they'd said to me, it's because in certain cases, gonorrhea can spread from an area that you've been infected, such as your rectum, your urethra, or your throat. And it can manifest in other areas of your bodies, like the joints, and it can disguise itself as arthritis, where it then starts to cause a lot of other problems and can be fatal if left untreated, because it becomes a chronic infection and it's not nice. They ruled that out very quick for me. Mine's is just arthritis, so a win-win, I guess. But these are issues that you can have, and especially with drug-resistant variants, these are especially dangerous because regular antibiotic treatments that would usually kill them are not going to touch them. They are completely resistant, so you are at a higher risk of developing complications and potentially getting even more ill. So it's important to know your status before having hookups, and it's also important to have these conversations with your partner regarding their status. Being able to have these conversations, and say you did have a hookup with someone and then afterwards you tested positive for something, being able to get back in communication with them to let them know so that then they can go and get tested to make sure it's not starting a chain reaction is vital. It's also important to talk about limits. Everyone will have physical limits. These aren't limits regarding kink, these are limits regarding how far they can go with a kink. These should be discussed beforehand. With things like breath play, cock and ball torture, individual limits differ. Some people can hold their breath for a minute or more, other people can hold it for 30 seconds or less. CBT is similar, pain tolerances for some might be lower, so you have to have these discussions and ensure limits are respected. You can slightly push these limits at discussion, of course. You need to have these discussions first, because someone might say, oh, I can take a light slap. You say, are you sure? And but always make sure everything's within limits, because you can do serious damage and potentially kill someone, and I'm pretty sure that is something that everyone would like to avoid. It's also important to talk about aftercare as well. This is something that not a lot of people consider. A lot of people think of hookups as you meet up, you have sex, you go away. That's it. while that might be the case for a lot of them, when you're having kink hookups, it is important to consider aftercare. Especially for kinks that are rougher. Aftercare is important to make sure those involved are okay. Keeping hydrated, having plenty of air, and making sure items and people are cleaned afterwards can prevent medical issues. You don't need to be the cuddly type and spoon afterwards, but making sure you and your partner are both safe, satisfied, and sane, meaning alert and talking, can ensure mitigation of any complications from these rougher kinks. So the triple S is kind of key for aftercare. You want to make sure safe, so you want to make sure nobody is in any dangerous positions, nobody is being left somewhere. Satisfied, maybe it is a power dynamic where somebody gets satisfaction, the other person gets blue balls, maybe literally or figuratively. And sane is this. The third one is the most important of sane. Making sure they are alert and talking, especially with breath play and CBT, because these are more physical. They can lead to complications where something's not quite right and maybe medical attention is needed. So it is important to make sure that this one is focused on, just so that everyone is kind of happy and healthy. The last one we're going to talk about is red flag, green flag. It's important to consider red flags and green flags when engaging in any hookups. Someone who's going to be respectful and safe with you is someone that is showing green flags, and these are maybe people that you would want to consider having hookups with again. Someone who is not going to respect your limits and who's gonna, maybe be a little bit more dangerous and not respect, your kinks, is someone that's got a red flag, and they're maybe not someone that you would want to hook up with again. Or, you are more than entitled to say, stop, I don't want to do this anymore, because it ties back to consent. And if they don't respect that, then yeah, they're definitely not someone that you should be hooking up with, and someone that you should maybe be contacting authorities about, because they can be dangerous individuals and pose a threat not only to you but to the community as a whole, which we would like to avoid. So, in conclusion, it is important to be open-minded, respectful, and communicate with your partner, and being mindful of the health and safety of everyone involved. So, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Dax Talks. It's a little bit different. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment. Just say if you thought this format was good or not, if you enjoyed just listening to me talk for 50 minutes. I didn't actually think I would talk for this long because I had 2 A4 sheets of paper of notes to talk from, just based on what I'd kind of jotted down. But if you did enjoy this, please, as I said, let me know, and we'll see about doing some more in the future. But that's all I've got for this episode of Dax's Deviants. Tune in next week for another chat with Dr. Sprout. Take care.